Should you buy this lens in 2022? Let's take a look. If you're new here, welcome. My name is Rocco and I'm a semi-professional photographer and filmmaker based here in Northern Virginia. If you're liking what you're seeing so far, it would be greatly appreciated if you could drop a like on the video and subscribe to my channel for more content just like this. But without any further ado, let's get right into the video. The Canon EF 85mm f1.4 L IS USM, it's quite a mouthful, was released back in 2014. And it's 2022 now as of the time I'm making this video, and that leads me to question whether or not it's actually a good lens to buy. And the short answer is yes, but also no, depending on your needs. And I'll get into that in just a moment here. In the era of the new Canon RF mount, a lot of photographers and videographers are debating whether or not to purchase RF lenses. And personally, I made a decision not to. And back in August of 2021, I purchased this Canon EF 85mm f1.4 L IS USM. I'm not going to say that again because it's a stupidly long name, so I'll just refer to this as the 85 1.4. I'm going to be comparing it a little bit to the RF 85 f1.2, which granted has a few differences and is a higher tier lens, so to speak, but that's actually the comparison a lot of people are making when wanting to buy a 85mm lens nowadays. Personally, the main deciding factor for just RF or EF lenses in general was price. I personally believe that the RF lenses are fantastic, however, extremely overpriced. The RF 85mm f1.2L, which is the lens I'm going to be comparing to the 85 1.4, is a $2,799 lens just to start with. When you add a UV filter onto that, you're talking about almost a $3,000 lens at that point. This lens clocks in at about $1,700, which is $1,000 less. And if you're someone who is kind of in between like a super professional and just a semi-professional, this is my second job technically doing photography, videography, I don't feel like I need to go out and buy a $3,000 lens because that might not make its money back, because an 85mm lens is a relatively limited use case lens. It's not as flexible as, say, something like a 24-70 or a 70-200. So this lens, I really wanted to have an 85mm lens because I wanted to have a high quality prime lens, so I made the decision to spend that money, and I haven't regretted it. It honestly works really great, and I got it before they raised the price. I think this lens actually used to be $1549, but now they've jacked it up to $1699. Inflation sucks. And although I do criticize the RF lenses for being more expensive, I'm actually not going to try to discredit them because they are fantastic. And technically speaking, the RF 85 1.2 is a optically perfect lens, like probably the best 85mm lens that has ever been made, but it comes at a price. And the average photographer or just general person using a camera doesn't really need to have that lens. At least in my opinion, I'm actually very happy with the f1.4. Granted, there is an obvious difference that the f1.2 is an f1.2, and it's directly mounted to the RF mount. This is the EF version you have to get the adapter for. Personally, I actually really like using the adapters because I actually picked up the drop-in filter adapter recently, which allows me to put an ND filter behind the lens and saves me a ton of time screwing it on and off and having to deal with different filter sizes. And that has actually solidified my reason not to buy an RF lens because it's so convenient to have an ND filter behind the lens. That's just my personal opinion on that, but mounts don't really matter, especially with a newer lens. This 2014, I would consider this a pretty new lens. There are no issues when you adapt it to an R series camera. It honestly works fantastic, so don't worry about any of that. Just because the 85 1.4 is an f1.4 and doesn't have the f1.2 aperture doesn't mean you can't do great things with it, because it actually has image stabilization built into the lens, which is something the f1.2 does not. Granted, it is very hard to put image stabilization into an f1.2 lens because that lens is already massive, and it would be even more massive if they were even able to put that in, and obviously more expensive too. So there is a trade-off. However, with the new Canon R5, R6, R3, and any future cameras that have IBIS in them, they actually can achieve up to 8 stops of stabilization in the camera with that lens, because if you've seen pictures of the 85 1.2, it is massive, and the image circle it projects onto the sensor is massive, which allows the sensor to move around quite a bit. And using this lens, I can get 5 stops of image stabilization in the R6, and then once I pair it with my 85 1.4, which has, I think, another 5 stops of internal image stabilization, it's either 5 or 4, either way I'm getting around supposedly 9 stops of image stabilization. So if you really actually want better image stabilization, you might want to go for the EF version. But I don't think there's a huge difference between 8 and 9 stops of image stabilization because you can only hold your camera so steady. At that point, it's just more of a marketing thing for Canon, so keep that in mind. But either way, you're going to get great image stabilization. But if you don't have a camera with IBIS, you probably want to get this one if you're shooting handheld video or shooting in fast-paced environments for photo. I don't think it's a slacker at all. I really love the 1.4's image stabilization. It works great in combination with the IBIS, and there's no wobbly warping because it's a tighter lens. As far as autofocus goes, this lens is no slacker for that. It is probably my fastest focusing lens, faster than my 70-200. I think that's really awesome. If you're in a darker scenario and you're shooting at f1.4, you might have a little bit more time for it to hunt and get it locked in. But if you're in a bright situation and you have one of the newer Canon EOS R bodies like the R6, R5, you're gonna have like snappy autofocus performance. I've actually dialed back my autofocus for video because it's too fast. Whenever I want to have a smooth autofocus pull in video, I just can't do it with the default settings, so I actually have toned it back for that, but for photos it's at its maximum speed. Granted, if I really wanted smooth focus pulls, I would go manual focus. So I think the 85 1.2 RF would have slightly better autofocus since it's the newer lens, but since it is an f1.2, it has more glass to move around, so it might actually be slower and maybe a little bit louder than this lens. This lens has a little bit of noise when you are using autofocus. It's kind of like it sounds like that. I've heard that the RF version is a more like high-pitched sound. I just think, you know, if you're shooting video, you're probably going to park it at a certain focus like I'm doing right now on my 50mm, and it's, I mean, unless I'm moving forward a lot, it's not going to pulse back and forth that much, so I wouldn't really worry about it. But if you're kind of doing run and gun shooting, it depends on whether or not you want a lower or a higher pitch, or if it even matters to you. If you're, I don't know, it's kind of a, you're just gotta have to deal with it if you're shooting on a prime because it has to move a ton of glass. Either way, it's gonna be loud. When I try to think about cons of this lens, it's hard to think about cons, although there is one that does come to mind, which is chromatic aberration. I'm really nitpicking at this point, but the 85 1.4 has a little bit of purple chromatic aberration when you're in backlit scenarios stopped all the way open to f1.4. As soon as you stop down to around f1.8, f2, it'll go away, and there is a little bit of vignetting, but I actually like vignetting to a certain degree, so I don't really worry about that as much, and I don't think many photographers care about it. It is sharp edge to edge as long as you have the plane of focus right, but the chromatic aberration, it's really only in backlit scenarios, but it can be a little annoying if you're shooting video. I can correct it in photo, but if I'm shooting video, it's a little bit more difficult, although I can. It just takes a little bit more time to correct it. So you just got to keep that in mind. The RF 85 1.2 apparently doesn't have any. It has like the best 85mm like lens coatings in existence, so it has pretty much zero chromatic aberration. So that's great if you want to spend $3,000 on it. An 85mm lens at f1.4, despite being f1.4, as long as you hit the focus right, it'll be sharp. And for photos, it's amazing. For video, I think it's a little too sharp. So I actually put a Pro Mist filter on it a lot of the time, and it actually works really great on a telephoto lens, because having a Pro Mist filter on a telephoto lens actually exaggerates the effects, and it creates a more natural, I guess, filmic, dreamy look, and I really love that. So you might actually be seeing a little bit of a pro mist on this. I'm doing it in post because I don't have a pro mist that fits on my 50 millimeter, but personally that's my taste. I don't like super over sharpened images or video, especially video. I can deal with an over sharpened image because sometimes I do want a sharp image, and sometimes I do want a sharp video. If I'm doing client work, I'm not going to use a pro mist on it. I'm going to use this lens because it's super sharp. But yeah, if you like shooting like dreamy video, just maybe get a pro mist filter for it to dial back that sharpness a little bit. But yeah, I mean, shooting video on this lens is absolutely fantastic. It works great handheld. The focus ring, I don't know really, I don't have much to compare it to. I mean, it's obviously no cinema lens. It's a photo stills lens first, not a cinema lens at all. So it's not gonna have this like most accurate pinpointed like focus ring, but it does pretty well for most scenarios. And if I'm using a monitor or I can punch into the shot on the camera's LCD, I can get pull focus really easily. And I actually do pull focus a lot on this lens because I like to have, you know, that handheld manual like run and gun thing. With the image stabilization, I can get some impressively smooth shots. A lot of the shots in my upcoming short film were shot on this lens, so do be sure to check that out when it comes out. I'm not sure when exactly I'll be releasing it, but you might be seeing some teaser footage in this video, so enjoy. Overall, I do believe that this lens is pretty much my favorite lens to use. Now, if you're willing to stick with EF lenses in 2022, you should definitely get this lens if you're looking for a telephoto prime lens that will just get you splendid photos and videos. Like, some of my favorite photos I've shot were shot on this lens, and that's coming from someone that used to love shooting wide. I actually really love shooting with the 85 if I'm in the right circumstance for it. So I don't think you will regret buying this lens. Your wallet might hurt for a little bit, but I think the photos you get will make up for it. So yeah, if you want to see some more samples, you can check out my website and my Instagram page, which are linked in the description. It'd be appreciated if you could give me a follow on Instagram. Obviously, photos are more compressed there, so if you want to see more uncompressed versions, go and check out my website. It's on my personal page. You can pretty much tell which ones are the 85. It's the more telephoto ones. That's really all I've got for this video. I appreciate you watching, especially to the end. Is anyone else using this lens in 2022? Let me know in the comments section below. My name's Rocco, and I will see you all in the next video. Peace. I've been telling them keep up. That way the time and they ease up. This ain't my